When you start your draping, especially if you are new into draping, I suggest to work with lightweight muslin fabric till your hands get used to fold and pin and manipulate the darts and sewing the garments. We mainly will use straight line and the grain line of non-stretchy fabrics in draping, and we start using bias cuts and stretch fabrics later on when we get little advanced. When we buy fabrics, they usually roll the fabric, and the side of the fabrics that we see has a thicker woven part. This is called selvage. And the selvage of the fabric is straight grain. That's the straight grain of the fabrics. When we drape, especially in the basic bodies, tops, we usually lay this part straight on our center front. Our straight grain is parallel with our selvage, and 90-degree cross of the straight grain is our cross grain, which is mostly the place that we cut fabric, and it has tend to fray, and you can see the fabrics fraying from that part. This is our cross grain, this is our straight grain, and our true bias line is 45 degree of the straight grain and the cross grain. Now, straight grain doesn't have, especially right now we are with the muslin, it doesn't have stretch mostly, but if any kind of woven fabric, not talking about the knits or stretchy fabrics, I'm talking about the woven fabrics. In the straight grain, we usually have not much of any room for the stretch, almost none. But in the cross grain, we have somewhat of a little bit of stretch. Again, in muslin fabrics, we don't have either much of a stretch, but cross grain has a little bit more than straight grain that has none, any stretch. But our bias has a stretch. Let's fold it from here and let me show you how much it stretches. See? It has a pretty good stretch even on the muslin fabrics. Now, what is bias, where is bias, and what's the true bias? True bias is always 45 degrees cutting the straight grain and the cross grain. 45 degrees. But our other lines, for example, this is true bias because it cuts 45, but this is bias too. Or this is bias too. It's not true bias, but still we see this as a bias. Sometimes some bias, if they are not true bias or not 45 degrees, they don't have as much as stretch as a true bias, but we still can see this as bias lines of the fabric.